Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We express our gratitude for the privilege of being here on this land. I'm Bijan Ahmadi, the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy, and it's my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the inaugural Ottawa Dialogue on Taiwan. IPD is a nonprofit and nonpartisan international affairs think tank that operates in both Canada and the United States. In Canada, we concentrate on three core objectives: to provide our decision makers with the strategic insights, analysis, and policy recommendations grounded in evidence-based research and prudent realism; to facilitate the exchange of knowledge between Canadian and international scholars and policy researchers; and to identify, educate, and nurture the next generation of Canadian policy leaders who will help our country strengthen its position and advance its interests on the global stage. Today's event has been made possible through our collaboration with the Global Taiwan Institute, the co-sponsor of this conference, and with the support of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Canada. I thank both organizations for supporting this initiative. Our goal in launching this dialogue is to create an annual Canadian forum focused on policy discussions and strategic analysis concerning Taiwan. Amid the evolving complexities of the Indo-Pacific geopolitical landscape, this annual forum will serve as a valuable platform for the exchange of knowledge and insights among policy researchers and practitioners from Canada, Taiwan, and the United States. We convene at a pivotal time. Escalating tensions across the Taiwan Strait require our undivided attention. The People's Republic of China's increasing assertiveness through military posturing and gray zone tactics has placed Taiwan at the heart of strategic realignments in the Indo-Pacific. During my recent visit to Taiwan this past June as part of a delegation of Canadian researchers and think tank executives, one message came across loud and clear from both experts and political leaders that we met there. There is an urgent need to bolster collective deterrence among allies and partners. Beijing's expanding military capabilities and aggressive foreign policy have heightened concerns about its intentions in the Taiwan Strait. However, military deterrence alone is insufficient. Economic coercion is another tool Beijing uses to achieve its objectives. Strengthening the resilience of critical supply chains not only enhances Taiwan's economic security, but also minimizes the risk of global disruptions. Moreover, Taiwan is grappling with concerted efforts by the PRC aimed at its diplomatic isolation. These attempts manifest in various ways, such as Beijing blocking Taiwan's participation in international organizations and coercing countries that seek to develop or strengthen their relations with Taiwan. Given this challenging environment, it becomes our collective responsibility as Taiwan's democratic allies and partners to ensure that its voice is not just heard, but effectively amplified on the international stage. In today's dialogue, we have designed our program to rigorously examine the complex challenges I've outlined. Following this morning's keynote address, we'll delve into three expert-led discussions, each focusing on these crucial questions. How can Taiwan and its democratic allies, including the United States and Canada, enhance collective deterrence against the PRC to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait? What vulnerabilities exist in supply chains, and what are the impending risks and opportunities in the economic relationship between Canada and Taiwan? And how can diplomatic channels be utilized effectively to foster peace and mitigate conflict? Last week, at the annual symposium of the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington, D.C., Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu stated in part of a video message to the conference, and I quote, facing threat and coercion, we're confident enough to say that peace is the only option, for the consequences of war will be too serious for the rest of the world to bear. Aligned with this sentiment, this forum aims to explore how Canada, in coordination with the US and other allies, can employ a balanced array of diplomatic, economic, and strategic tools to contribute to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. I invite each of you to contribute your expertise to what promises to be a rigorous and enlightening dialogue. Today's opening keynotes aim to set the stage for our in-depth discussions. We're privileged to commence with a keynote address from Dr. Tseng, Taiwan's esteemed representative to Canada. Following Dr. Tseng's remarks, we'll have the opportunity to hear from two Canadian parliamentarians from both sides of the aisle, who will shed light on their contributions to Canada-Taiwan relations. This will set the stage for our subsequent panel discussions. For those of you who may not be familiar with Dr. Tseng's distinguished career, allow me to offer a brief overview. Prior to his current role as Taiwan's representative to Canada, Dr. Tseng has served in multiple key positions in Taipei, including as Deputy Secretary General in the Office of the President and the National Security Council and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. He has also served in different diplomatic roles, serving as Taiwan's ambassador to the Republic of Palau, as well as Taiwan's representative to the European Union and Belgium. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tseng.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to start by thanking Mr. Bijang Ahmadi, Executive Director of the Institute of Peace and Diplomacy, and Mr. Russell Shaw, the Executive Director of the Global Taiwan Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C., for their partnership to organize this inaugural Ottawa Dialogue on Taiwan. In my view, Ottawa is not a capital of vibrant think tank culture if compared with Washington, D.C. The sheer number of think tanks and their sponsor activities simply cannot compare with those in Washington, D.C. But for that matter, I even more appreciate the effort of GTI and the IPD for today's event. I'm also impressed by the stellar lineup of panelists from both Canada and the United States. Some of them have served as government policy practitioners for most of their career life. I'm sure their participation will help us to better understand the complex issues surrounding Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. Why is it necessary to discuss Taiwan? The simple answer is because much is at stake, and also because some misperceptions must be clarified. Although Taiwan has been reported frequently in the past few years, especially during the COVID pandemic, when Taiwan was often in the news for its success stories of combating the COVID pandemic. But still, Taiwan is not sufficiently understood or appreciated due to the complexities of the matters involved. Speaking about misperception, let me share one example. The Economist in May 2021 portrays Taiwan in the issue's cover page as, I quote, the most dangerous place on earth. To many people, the danger has grown as time went on. However, the 2023 edition of the Expert Insider Survey, which is one of the world's largest survey on living and working abroad, ranks Taiwan among the top 5 best countries for expats to work and live. Well, in fact, many of those who have visited Taipei consider it one of the most safest cities in the world. So isn't that interesting? Either the Economist or the Expert Insider is wrong. There are quite a few contradictory perceptions regarding Taiwan, and some are not easy, even for a China hand to comprehend. One of them stood out particularly in recent years. That is, Taiwan's youth seemed numb to China's threat. Indeed, the younger generation is not the most enthusiastic group in the voter turnout, but is it true that young people in Taiwan are numb to China's threats? I don't think so, and I don't think we need to go far to find out. The Sunflower Movement in spring 2014 is still well remembered in Taiwan. The protest was driven mainly by college students who perceived that a trade deal with China would hurt Taiwan's economy and would leave us vulnerable to Beijing's political pressure. So out of anger and frustration, the students occupied the floor of our parliament, the Legislative Yuan, for 24 days, paralyzing agenda until the government caved in. Many student activists became involved in Taiwan's politics later. For me, when in doubt of our young generation's political apathy, just recall what they did in the 2014 Sunflower Movement. From my perspective as a Taiwanese, I certainly hope that Taiwan can be evaluated, can be studied from a more holistic context, not to be overshadowed by issues of national security or geopolitical confrontation all the time. But the reality doesn't always conform. The merits and value of Taiwan often must give way to its perceived vulnerability vis-à-vis China when it comes down to the relations between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. But sometimes Taiwan will be given a chance to prove herself. If there was a silver lining for Taiwan in the COVID pandemic, it would be that by contrast, Taiwan has outperformed many countries, including China, and showed its strength and resilience not only in fighting the pandemic, but also in helping remedy the global supply chains. Let me elaborate. When COVID-19 broke out in Wuhan, China, late 2019, Taiwan, with its proximity, was thought to be the first to suffer from the virus's quick outspread. But it didn't happen. In fact, starting from December 30th, 2019, when most countries were unaware of such virus, our public health officers already boarded each plane from Wuhan to check if any passenger carried signs of symptom. As a result of our vigilance, in between 2020 and 2021, we kept a record of 253 consecutive days without any new confirmed domestic cases. We were among the best performing countries in the world by any standard. You may also recall that throughout 2020, most countries had been struggling with acute shortage of medical supplies, ranging from face masks, PPEs, to a variety of hygiene products. In Taiwan, we were only able to produce 1.8 million face masks per day in late January 2020, far below the need of our 23 million plus population. By working in synergy with our private sector, we quickly set up new production lines to make 20 million face masks per day by early May, more than 10 times up in just 4 months, enough to meet our domestic demand and share with nations in need. This is the first time Taiwan showed its resilience under the pandemic. Meanwhile, a severe global shortage of chips was strongly felt in the auto industry due to the industry's policy of keeping low inventory. Looking back, it was quite unexpected that the drop of the auto market in the first half of 2020, forcing auto companies to withdraw their chip orders, saw a sudden return of demand in the final quarter of the same year. We were urged by G7 economic ministers to speed up and expand our chip productions. We offer our helping hand again. The second time, Taiwan showed its resilience under the pandemic. The COVID pandemic has coincidentally demonstrated the strengths of Taiwan, which would not have been noticed otherwise. But Taiwan's success in the pandemic is not to downplay the daunting challenge it faces in its economic relations with China, particularly its perceived overdependence on the Chinese market. Is Taiwan's foreign trade overdependent on China? Some critics argue that Taiwan's overdependence on the Chinese market showed that Taiwan is not prepared for a possible invasion from China. They pointed out that the nearly 40% of Taiwan's exports and 20% of its imports depend on the Chinese market. And this is simply unsustainable if a war broke out. So how is Taiwan trying to address this issue and to reduce its overdependence on the Chinese market? Let me offer my views. It is worth noting that Taiwan invested $14.6 billion in China back in 2011 alone. While in 2021, 10 years later, Taiwan invested in China a total of only $5 billion, which was smaller than Taiwan's overall investment to the Indo-Pacific region in the same year. In the meantime, Taiwanese capitals, together with the foreign capitals as a whole, was moving out of China in a speed unseen before. I tend to see the current overdependence, if you will, of Taiwan's trade on China's market as a protracted lingering legacy of globalization and its derivative industrial chain in the past decades. As the West and China are going through the economic decoupling or de-risking, if you will, we are trying to adapt as well. It is expected that investment from Taiwan to China will continue to shrink. Along with it, the bilateral trade volume between the two sides will gradually decrease. It is also worth noting that Taiwan's current export items to China are mainly industrial parts, components, accessories, and machine equipment. They are to be assembled in China before further exported to markets in other markets in the world. In fact, China needs import from Taiwan more than the other way around for its foreign trade. One way or another, as trade is often driven by investment, and since Taiwan has sped up diversifying its investment to the Indo-Pacific, the makeup of its trade with China will also change accordingly. Now, security. So what about Taiwan's security? Well, the war in Ukraine has indeed stimulated debates in Taiwan about a possible Chinese attack on the island. Many believed that if Putin had been able to attack Kyiv as he had planned, and if the West had been too slowly to unite and resist, China's President Xi might have rescheduled his move to Taiwan earlier. But a special report in The Economist argued earlier this year that people in Taiwan are not decided if they want to fight China. It is very misleading. Firstly, fear sales. As you know, Taiwan's presidential election is approaching. Some political parties try to play up and chant that war is coming if their opponents were to win the election. The war versus peace narrative is largely a campaign strategy aiming to rally support from voters. Of course, it also reveals that China is relentless in intervening and manipulating our elections. It is a challenge that we face on a daily basis. Secondly, even in Ukraine, before the Russian invasion, most people had advocated against war. Nobody wants war if there is still a slight chance for peace. But when the invasion broke out, it quickly drew Ukrainians to fight back. Taiwan should be viewed in the same light, as China's invasion is not imminent. But one thing is clear, though. One thing is clear, that no politician can survive in Taiwan if they choose to surrender. Just recall the 2014 Sunflower Movement. We in Taiwan know very well that neither vibrant democracy or strong economy is enough to keep Taiwan safe. The most important three things for Taiwan to survive and thrive are regional security, economic growth, and international participation. We are sparing no efforts to reinforce all these three dimensions for our own protection and continuous development. Our challenge is not only the sheer difference in size vis-à-vis China, but that we have limited access to appeal to international assistance. For Taiwan, the impressive international campaign President Zelensky has garnered after the Russian invasion must all be carried out prior to the war, or else it will be too late, simply because Taiwan has no such easy access to the international community. We are now racing against time to strengthen our military build-up. Reserve force reform is well underway. Asymmetric warfare is our new doctrine. Our first home-built submarine will add to the other two currently in service in 2025. As for our international outreach, what I call a preventive diplomacy. A preventive diplomacy is vital to deter war from happening. And for that to be successful, like-minded countries must work together. If Ukraine is a lesson to learn, we must remember that deterrence is always cheaper than fighting a war. To conclude, in the beginning of this year, we still saw the war in Ukraine as the most dangerous geopolitical conflict. But looking forward, the sudden eruption of war in Gaza have converged all attention. The two flashpoints in Eastern Europe and Middle East are both now engulfed in war. The other two, namely Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait, must keep very high vigilance. Another unexpected development having geopolitical implications is the abrupt downturn of China's economy. If it continues to falter, which is very likely from where it stands now, it has the potential to become the biggest geopolitical risk in the years ahead. If China's economy crumbles, it will be a combination of social, economic, fiscal, political emergencies. It is likely to become a systemic crisis and overall transformation affecting every aspect of China. So in short, there is a huge uncertainty hovering over China. So while addressing issues elsewhere, let's not turn our attention away from the Indo-Pacific. Let me stop here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tseng. Your speech has certainly set the tone and the context for our program and for the discussions that will follow. Now we have the privilege to hear from another distinguished guest. I'm pleased to introduce MP Michael Cooper. He is a Conservative Member of Parliament representing the riding of St. Albert, Edmonton. Michael was first elected to Parliament in 2015 and has been re-elected in subsequent years, most recently in 2021. Michael Cooper currently serves as the Shadow Minister for Democratic Reform. He's also a member of the Parliamentary Friendship Group between Canada and Taiwan. In June of 2021, he introduced Bill C-315, the Canada-Taiwan Relations Framework Act. Although the bill did not progress due to the call of the 2021 election, MP Cooper reintroduced similar legislation in June 2023 through Bill C-343. Today, Mr. Cooper will be sharing insights on Canada-Taiwan relations and will discuss his private member's bill on Taiwan. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming MP Michael Cooper.
Well, good morning, everyone. Ambassador Tseng, distinguished guests. It is truly a privilege to be here to speak in what is most certainly a timely dialogue on Taiwan. And I want to also acknowledge the Institute for Peace and Democracy for facilitating today's policy discussion. And specifically, I will be speaking about legislation that I have recently reintroduced in the House of Commons. But before I get into the specifics of that legislation, let me say that for the 8 years that I have been a member of Parliament, I have been a consistent advocate for strengthening Canada-Taiwan relations. And I have been a consistent advocate because I firmly believe that it is in as much as Canada's strategic interests as it is in Taiwan's strategic interests to strengthen bilateral relations. After all, Canada and Taiwan enjoy strong and growing economic ties. Taiwan is one of Canada's largest trading partners. Indeed, Taiwan is Canada's fastest growing country in bilateral trade in Asia. Our economies, in many respects, are complementary. Taiwan offers high-tech products and services that Canada needs, including in strategically important areas such as high-end chip making. Likewise, Taiwan provides an opportunity for Canada to export products including clean and ethical Canadian energy, agricultural products, and other commodities. We have strong people-to-people links. And most importantly, we share common values, including a commitment to freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, with Taiwan arguably being the strongest and most consolidated democracy in Asia. And so, having regard for those linkages, economic, people-to-people, and values-based, why wouldn't Canada want to strengthen ties with Taiwan? Now, there are those who offer caution against further engagement on the basis that further engagement will antagonize Beijing to Canada's detriment. I strongly disagree. Make no mistake about it. Taiwan is on the front line in defense of our democratic values against an increasingly expansionist and dangerous authoritarian communist regime based in Beijing. Beijing's belligerence vis-a-vis Taiwan, which amounts to a gray zone assault, poses a threat to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, more broadly to the Indo-Pacific region, and is a direct challenge to the international rules-based order. And in that regard, Taiwan's de facto independence and the possibility that that could be taken away must be taken seriously. And so I would submit that the most prudent approach to deterring further escalation on the part of the Beijing regime is not through signaling weakness and deference to the demands of Beijing, but rather to demonstrate solidarity along with our allies, with our democratic friend Taiwan. And that further underscores why I believe it is in Canada's strategic interests to enhance relations with Taiwan. And I have recently reintroduced a bill that I would submit is a blueprint for a way in which Canada can strengthen bilateral relations with Taiwan. It's called the Canada-Taiwan Relations Framework Act. It would establish a framework for strengthening relations, including in respect of legal, economic, and cultural affairs. It provides a workable mechanism by which to conduct relations absent a formal relationship. And it does so in a manner that is consistent with Canada's One China policy, a policy that I would emphasize merely takes note without accepting Beijing's contention that Taiwan is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China, which, of course, Taiwan has never been and hopefully never will be. And I say that because Canada's One China policy provides a significant flexibility for Canada to enhance relations with Taiwan, flexibility that successive governments have not leveraged. This bill leverages that flexibility. More specifically, the bill would make it a policy or codify the policy of the Government of Canada to support Taiwan's participation in multilateral fora, including the WHO, WHA, ICAO, and Interpol. The only reason for Taiwan's continued exclusion is because of Beijing's bullying, which is completely unacceptable. And as such, it is important that Canada redouble its efforts to support Taiwan's participation within the UN system and other multilateral fora, recognizing the significant expertise that Taiwan brings to the table in a number of areas, including international health and international health security. Canada loses, the world loses, when Taiwan does not have a seat at the table. Further, the bill would make it a policy of Government of Canada to support Taiwan's membership in international trade agreements, including the CPTPP. And speaking of the CPTPP, I believe that it is in Canada's interests to fully and enthusiastically support Taiwan's membership in the CPTPP. After all, Taiwan is one of the world's growing and dynamic and advanced economies. It is already well integrated in the Indo-Pacific region. It fully satisfies the economic and regulatory requirements for membership, and Canada stands to gain, having regard for the complementary nature and the growing economic ties that we have with Taiwan. Importantly, the bill would provide opportunities for layover diplomacy, much as the U.S.-Taiwan Relations Act does. It would facilitate Taiwanese officials, senior Taiwanese officials all the way up to the president, to be able to come to Canada visa-free, where the primary purpose of a visit is not official. And quite appropriately, it recognizes that Taiwan is Taiwan, and to that end would permit the Office of the Government of Taiwan in Canada, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, to be renamed the Taiwan Representative Office, recognizing that that office represents all the people of Taiwan, all 23.5 million people of Taiwan, and not just those in Taipei City. And I would note, seeing the ambassador to Lithuania, that Lithuania very boldly took a number of steps to enhance engagement with Taiwan, including permitting Taiwan's office there to be named the Taiwan Representative Office. There's much that we could learn from the approach that tiny Lithuania, in comparison to Canada, has taken to strengthening ties with Taiwan, demonstrating resiliency as well in the face of punitive measures that were taken by Beijing in response. Lithuania is standing with democratic Taiwan. Canada needs to do more in that regard. So I'm very pleased to say that the bill has received some momentum in recent weeks with my Conservative Senate colleague, Michael MacDonald, having introduced a mirroring bill in the Senate. And so now there is legislation to establish a Framework Act in both chambers, both the House of Commons and the Senate, which enhances the possibility that we will get this legislation across the finish line, although I would concede, having regard for how our Parliament takes up private members' bills, that it is a long shot, but nonetheless, it is a blueprint. It is a blueprint that I would invite the government to take a careful look at as the government seeks to, on the whole, further engage Taiwan, which has been positive. And so this is a small step, but an important step. Taiwan is a thriving democracy, a democracy that Canada has many common interests with. It is time, long past time, that Canada's policy towards Taiwan reflected that reality. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in your deliberations today.
Thank you, MP Cooper, for sharing your insights and perspective with us. And it's now my pleasure to introduce another esteemed guest who has been very active as a parliamentarian on Canada's approach towards its relationship with Taiwan and PRC. Ken Hardie is the Liberal Member of Parliament for the Fleetwood Port Kells constituency in BC. Now in his third term, Ken has a rich background in communications and public affairs. He currently serves as the chair of the Special Committee on the Canada-People's Republic of China relationship. Today in his speech, MP Hardie will be focusing on the work of the Special Committee, specifically its findings and recommendations in a recent report that the committee published on Canada-Taiwan relations. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to MP Ken Hardie.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm just scanning the room to see if there are any members of our committee here. And I don't see any, but that's okay. You've heard from Michael Cooper, and you know, I think that one of the things that distinguishes this committee is how nonpartisan it is and how focused we are on the things that really matter. I'll get into that in a bit. Because what I really valued from this invitation was the opportunity to present what I feel was an excellent analysis and report with a rich suite of recommendations produced by this all-party special committee on Canada-China relations. It includes members from the Liberal, Conservative, Bloc Québécois, and New Democratic parties. And it's important to note that just as the Liberal government is in a minority position, there are more members of the opposition than there are on the government side. This committee is constituted the same way. There are more members of the opposition on the committee than there are from the governing Liberals. And that's important because if this committee was to act in a highly partisan way, we wouldn't get very much good work done. But good work is being done. Very, very collaborative with a unifying focus on the issues with Canada-China relations. And the conclusive proof of this was the committee's report, Canada and Taiwan, a strong relationship in turbulent times. It was unanimously adopted by this committee. We collaborated on the findings and on the recommendations. When I tabled this in the House, Michael Chong, who's a very valued member of the committee, got up and he added some things to it to maybe give it a little bit more push in areas that he felt was important, and we agree with him. I tabled the report last March, and the following month I joined a parliamentary delegation with key members, by the way, of the Canada-China Committee on a visit to Taiwan. And I have to, at this point, recognize the incredible logistical support and superb hospitality of Mr. Hardie from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Canada, and his colleague Angus Yang, wonderful young fellow who at that time was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They made sure that our delegation had very, very high quality time with key military and industrial leaders and government ministers, and especially with President Wen, who literally hugged the copy of our report when I presented it to her. Now, to the report itself, our findings are recommendations in the response to the report by the Canadian government. First, the report established the principle long held by Canada and most of our allies of the One China policy that was established in 1970, consistent with the United Nations General Assembly resolution, which recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legitimate government of China. But the policy neither endorses nor challenges the PRC's position on Taiwan. This position has not impeded Canada's engagement with Taiwan, which we and most of the world know as a democratic and progressive island. This relationship is bolstered by people-to-people ties, parliamentary visits, multilateral engagement, and mutually beneficial economic interests. That said, our committee's first recommendation in the report called for all official communication from Canadian government agencies, institutions, and departments to be in line with Canada's official position. But we're also acutely aware of PRC President Xi Jinping's comments a year ago when he said, "Taiwan is China's Taiwan. Resolving the Taiwan question is a matter for the Chinese, a matter that must be resolved by the Chinese. We'll continue to strive for peaceful reunification with the greatest sincerity and the utmost effort, but we will never promise to renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all measures necessary." Have to overlay that with an interesting statistic that clearly about 60% of the people who live in Taiwan consider themselves to be Taiwanese, not necessarily Chinese. So you can see there's a gap that's clearly developed over a period of time. And mindful of all of this, our second recommendation, one that I believe was most heartfelt by Taiwan, was that the Government of Canada offer and declare its clear and unwavering commitment that the future of Taiwan must only be the decision of the people of Taiwan. Now, the government's response to this particular recommendation, released when the House of Commons resumed its sittings on September 18th, was, in my view, and to be candid, not as heartfelt as I would like to have seen. But the foundation of Canada's long-standing position mentioned in their response is clearly in line. Canada opposes unilateral actions by either side that seek to alter the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. It says the same thing, but just not as warm as I would like to have seen. Now, for those of you not familiar with Canada's parliamentary committee process, here's how it works. We adopt a motion, the committee member brings a motion, let's do this. Okay, everybody agrees, and in this case, everybody unanimously agreed that we had to study our relationship with Taiwan. We then invite witnesses to present testimony and to answer questions. And a couple of specific examples of the results of that work I wanted to kind of flesh out this morning. From the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world saw just how powerful and effective Taiwan's response was to the threat emanating from just 128 kilometers away on the mainland. We heard that very early on, in fact, in December 2019, Taiwan's government expressed to the World Health Organization its concerns relating to human-to-human transmission of the virus. But we're reminded that China had blocked Taiwan's observer status in the World Health Assembly in 2016. And in spite of Taiwan's best efforts, there was no response from the WHO to the warnings that they received. Our committee noted this disastrous waste of expertise and valuable time, and so our fifth recommendation called on Canada to engage with allies to promote Taiwan's meaningful participation in multilateral organizations. On May the 2nd, I wrote to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, and then Minister of Health, Jean-Yves Duclos, to get Taiwan's observer status restored at the World Health Association. On May 9th, the Canada-Taiwan Memorandum of Understanding on Health Cooperation was signed by the Executive Director of our Canadian Trade Office in Taipei, and of course, Tseng. This is another step in the process which earlier saw Health Minister Duclos reaffirm Canada's support for Taiwan's meaningful participation at WHA sessions in 2022. Now, Canada's G7 partners are all on side with this. And to be sure, involved or not with the WHA, I think it's pretty darn sure that Taiwan will continue to be the world's go-to example for how to handle a public health crisis when the next one comes along, as it most certainly will. Now, while we're still looking for success in restoring Taiwan's observer status at the WHA and other international bodies, we in the committee are delighted with the response to recommendation number 12, which was to establish a foreign investment promotion and protection agreement between Canada and Taiwan. Exploratory work on this began in January 22, and in April this year, Trade Minister Mary Ng launched formal negotiations. Now, it hasn't taken long. I think we're that close to getting it signed if it hasn't been signed already. I had a brief hallway chat with Minister Ng, and it's just across the finish line, or just about. This development amplifies Canada's significant interest in supporting Canadian industry's efforts to diversify export markets in the Indo-Pacific. And we'll hear more about that when our committee starts to study the Indo-Pacific strategy. And there's a special place for Taiwan in that, by the way. We also would want to advance Canada's key role as a supplier of critical minerals to like-minded partners. Our government's critical mineral strategy will opt to work with all opportunities to maximize the value-added benefits of building vertically integrated value chains with international partners, and especially domestically here at home. And here, Taiwan's incredible leadership in computer chip manufacturing is not lost on us. The government's also taken note of the recommendations in our report calling for priority assessment of Taiwan's application to join the CPTPP. That's the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Joining this partnership means living up to very ambitious economic, social, and environmental standards. Currently, the accession process to watch is that of the United Kingdom, the consensus decision on which will be made by the CPTPP Commission. Global Affairs Canada has engaged with the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Canada to discuss this accession process, which undoubtedly will be refined based on the experience with the UK. Now, a casual observer might find a stark difference between the ability of Taiwan to meet CPTPP standards and that of another applicant, 128 kilometers across the Taiwan Strait. That leads to some concluding thoughts coming out of our committee's report, its recommendation, the government's response, and reflections on our visit to Taiwan and the ongoing dialogue or transactions with China. When our parliamentary delegation flew to Taipei in April, we threaded the needle of the aggressive air and sea military gestures from the People's Republic of China. the PRC's increasingly bellicose behavior in the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, and indeed in many other locations and political spheres marks what one might hope to be a temporary failure, or a setback at least, in the West's approach to China since Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's visit in 1968 and US President Richard Nixon's visit in 1972. China's acceptance to the United Nations, which, by the way, will be 52 years the day after tomorrow, marked a pivot toward a strategy to include the PRC into the community of nations in the world with the intention of lifting its isolation, encouraging the democratization of its society. The results for now, at least, are not what we hoped, and I would strongly recommend reading of Jonathan Manthorpe's excellent book, Claws of the Panda, if you wanted to track all that's happened with Canada's views and attitude toward China since we had those aspirational goals in mind any number of years ago. And the Canadian government's response to the recommendations in our committee's report served to confirm our national position. Our government agrees with the principle of Recommendation 15, that Canada work with allies in support for the peaceful status quo and to cooperate with China, or with Taiwan, I should say, on peace and security issues. We'll cooperate with China too if they want to be cooperative. Canada has affirmed its support for international law and the international law of the sea with respect to the PRC's claims in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Further, our government has publicly called on the PRC to refrain from escalating its military threats. We shouldn't be surprised that the PRC will ignore that and continue its harassing behavior at sea and in the air that we've seen just within the last week. But we will proceed as planned with Royal Canadian Navy transits through the Taiwan Strait, or the Royal Canadian Air Force mission in support of Operation Neon, which is enforcing sanctions against North Korea. Now, I put forward the notion that the apparent failure of the West strategy toward the PRC might be temporary. And I want to offer a few personal observations, reflections on that. China watchers have been reported that not all is well over there. Economic growth is stagnating. They face a demographic challenge, I should say, yes, and a democratic one as well, due to the one-child policy in the past. The real estate bubble appears to have burst. Youth unemployment is extremely high. Industries and jobs are leaving. As much as they still remain engaged in efforts on climate change, air quality in many of their cities is extremely poor and, in fact, very dangerous. The costly belt and road investments have delivered poor returns, and it's the source of great resentment from nations that were lured into massive debts to the PRC, which, based on what we've seen so far, may well not ever be repaid. Xi Jinping's comments that China's current posture is about reversing a century of national humiliation could be taken as a boost to rev up the national pride and resolve, which is a pretty classic strategy to divert from problems experienced at home. But this is a valuable signal, and we should exercise a wise amount of care in our dealings and attitudes toward the PRC. Now, the West won't condone China's current behavior, and we're prepared to respond to aggression against Taiwan. But the wisdom from Taiwan's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Joseph Wu, that I heard in a meeting with him should not be lost. To isolate the PRC is to make it more dangerous. We have to avoid that. And without compromising our principles and interests, we have to try and offer a way forward, an exit ramp, if you will, toward a more productive, peaceful, and stable relationship with them. This experience that we've had recently with PRC is very similar to the point of a high-stakes international tension that we've seen in the past. From 1961 to 1989, the Berlin Wall separated communist East Germany from the West. Imagine the cruelty of living on the east side of that wall. In some places, you could look across the wall to the bright lights, the freedom, the vitality of West Berlin. And there you were in the dark, drab, depressing life of East Berlin. You could only dream of what it might be like to be on the other side, and some people tried and paid with their lives. Now, substitute the Taiwan Strait for the Berlin Wall. What do you get? Well, consider what looks to be the increasingly dark, drab, and depressing life those in the PRC have right now. And you start to see what may well be a source of social malaise President Jinping is struggling to address. We know the reunification of Germany was the eventual solution, a reunification that meant an end to restricted freedoms and depressing prospects for the future, not the life on the east side of the Berlin Wall. To the degree that the people on mainland China know what Taiwan has accomplished, it won't be hard to conclude the path they would like to take if they had the choice. We know for certain the path the people of Taiwan and its government will fight to avoid. The conclusion of our committee's report captures the essence of the West's position on the future of Taiwan. It's in the remarks offered by Representative Harry Tseng, quoted verbatim in the conclusion. The fact is that if Taiwan falls, democracy falls, and that'll be the ultimate concern for all of us. Indeed it is. And be it Ukraine, Israel, the promise of a Palestinian state, the Pacific land first named by Portuguese sailors as Ilha Formosa, beautiful island, what a beautiful name. God. Well, yes, the People's Republic of China too. The right of people in these places to choose their own path to peace, freedom, prosperity, and the common good of the world must be an ultimate concern for every nation that holds those values. Canada's all in. We're with Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Hardie, for joining us today and sharing your perspective and your insights, especially about the work of the Canada PRC Committee with us. We're going to take a very short break, only a couple of minutes, so to set up, to ask our next panelists to set up here. Please stay in the room. There is more coffee, so if you want to quickly go to the foyer and grab coffee, go ahead, but please be back in the next couple of minutes so we can start the first session, which will be moderated by Dave Perry, President of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Thank you.